Hello, everyone, and welcome to this, our final music industry insight series for this series that we're doing through Launchpad. This is the fifth one, and today we're going to be looking at live opportunities and navigating the world of getting bookings and performing live. If you haven't seen any of the other seminars we've been doing, workshops we've been doing, this as I mentioned, this is the fifth and final one of a series that we've done throughout July and August in 2023, covering things like getting ready to release music for the first time, or best practice in releasing, where royalties flow from, how to promote yourself, and funding of new music. If you sign up to these sessions, there is a link and a kind of folder of all those resources that are getting sent out. If you're watching this, assuming it's through some kind of Launchpad YouTube page or website, and hopefully all those resources are linked somewhere neatly as well in terms of like links to these slides. But again, if you are watching this after the fact and it's on our YouTube, if you need any more support, please kind of reach out to us, and there's kind of links at the end of this video as well. Again, if you don't know me, I am the director of Launchpad, which is run by Musical.ly/Music Local. I've kind of got a wide range of experience over the last 20 years. I founded the BA Music Industries Management course at Leeds Beckett University. I act as an advisor for other national funders such as PRS Foundation. And probably today is one of the most relevant is my experience in like previous life 15, 20 years ago, where I was a touring musician, ran a record label. Well, actually, for a short period of time, I ran a music venue in Leeds, put on a number of kind of bigger events through that, and my experience as a touring musician. So, as a touring musician, I was really active between 2003 and 2007. I think the year my band released an album, I think we played 300 gigs and we toured across Europe and North America. We were really lucky to play lots of festivals. We worked with a booking agent, but my experience running a venue and putting on essentially grassroots gigs, both in my original hometown of Wakefield and then Leeds, kind of informed a lot of kind of my attitude to approaching, navigating getting the best live opportunities as well, and the best kind of combination of things. It kind of brings me to the overview of what we're going to talk about today. So there's lots of, we've kind of broken up today into lots of different facets. And apologies for those kind of on the live call. I'll repeat something I said before I hit record, which is putting this together, I realised that the difference between talking about the best practice in terms of navigating live versus some of the other things that we talk about, like how royalties work, and even best practice in terms of recording, is it's much the variables are so much greater. And one thing about what I'm going to talk about today is it is mostly from the perspective of original artists, so artists who are performing music that they've written and are looking to expand their fan base. And I think one of the things is in live is that's quite a big generalization. A lot of people will approach live to play to existing audiences. They might perform a set of material that is popular in other ways, so like other artists' materials, like a covers band. So some of what I'm going to talk about will not be applicable in every scenario, but the core kind of thread through today is what we is the kind of artists that we're supporting through Launchpad, the general kind of basis of those artists, which is they're making their own music and they're going out and performing that live. And so all of what I'm going to talk about today is kind of the main stakeholders and approaches that you'll come across from that basis. So unlike some of the other things we talk about, this isn't this huge catch-all that we're generally quite proud of ourselves with Launchpad and approaching, but this is, 95% of the artists we support. This is the kind of live experiences that we think they're experiencing. And so, yeah, as usual, kind of anyone on the live call, feel free to kind of ask questions as we go. So this is what I'm going to break it down on today. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of approaching things from an artist perspective, a little bit of kind of the industry overview in terms of like who it is you're interacting with. That'll feed into how you talk to venues and promoters, thinking about being organized, things you need to do before a show, thinking about fees, advancing shows, how to promote shows, make the most of shows, and then I guess some of the kind of higher level things within the industry. So how you get kind of around supporting touring artists, festivals, working with bookers, and then a little bit of kind of housekeeping at the end. So, approaching live opportunities. I think one of the this feels like it's got a lot of synergy with approaching like how and why you approach releasing music in terms of what is it that you are trying to get out of performing live. And I think depending on what level an artist is at, you can have many different priorities. Now, some of you will look at this and think, well, I want to do all of those. And of course, in an ideal world, it might be that you want to do all encompass all things in every live opportunity. Certainly, at the start of building a live presence, it's quite hard to do all those things. So you might want to think about, based on where you're going to play and who you're playing with, what the priority is. And so those can be, at the very start, you want to play to friends. You've got people who are interested in what you're doing. You want to find an environment and a live experience that allows most people to go to. I'll run through various examples of that. That might mean you do, for example, a free gig, in terms of it makes it easier, that you reduce the barrier for your friends to come down. They get to see you play live. That's the priority. Making new fans, well, then you need to find new people to play to. So there's a set of considerations there that are maybe different. Maybe it's not that important to have friends and family, for example, at a show where that's your priority. Um, does playing live allow you to create additional content photos? Is that something that you're missing from the way in which you're promoting your other things that you're doing, releases? So again, is the kind of show something where you can get some kind of good content in terms of that? Do you need to make money from the show? Is it actually important that you kind of maximize the amount of ticket money that comes through the door or merch money? And I'll touch on all those things. Is it kind of strategic in terms of like the stakeholders that you might want to work with as a band? And again, I'll touch on that quite a lot. If you're looking to play in certain venues or open access to play festival slots, you need to know who those promoters and venues are. So you might be beneficial that the gig that you're doing is specifically to kind of introduce yourself to those people. And of course, it can be kind of going to new places as well. This will drag a lot around kind of playing in best practice in terms of perhaps starting out, but I'll be touching on how you kind of break into different places as well, kind of outside of your hometown. Now, of course, in an ideal world, you'd hit all 6 of these things. You can definitely look at hitting 2 or 3 of them. Some of them you might kind of contradict each other as well in doing more than one. But again, as you're building until the point where you kind of are fully established, you might want to think about what is the real priority for every kind of gig or live appearances that you're doing. I'm sorry, just repeating myself really, if you are considering like why it is you're taking on each live performance, you can think about how often you play. Because, for example, if you want to make you want to kind of get lots of people to your shows and sell tickets, the more you play, the more you might dilute that. Who you play with, like I already said, introducing new fans, where you're playing, who you work with, and how you promote what it is you're doing. So for example, if you want to make money from your gigs, maybe you need to put on your own show. You don't want, maybe it's better to not work with a middleman. Maybe you kind of really encourage friends and families to come on that basis, that they're supporting a tour, or it's like a fundraising thing. If you're looking to play a festival, for a certain promoter, can you play with them 6 to 9 months in advance? And again, if you really wanted to kind of build a fan base, well, where are those people? How do you get them to come? Is it worth collaborating with other artists as well? And a lot of these themes we'll keep coming back to throughout the slides today. And within all of that, it is where to play. Like I just said, there is, I think I'm grounded in kind of building a fan base within your hometown, but obviously, like a lot of, as I kind of go through some of the different bits, it's about building a more national fan base. I certainly feel like it's very recognizable when artists start kind of having like an expanded fan base and can go into other cities. Where are they? It's a really good idea to target those. So, like, where is achievable? Where do you know you can go and be received well because you've got friends, family? It's like a university town, or maybe you've already got connections with promoters and venues in that place, and really start building up those places around the UK as you go. And we'll touch on how you kind of build relationships with other promoters and venues as we go on, probably in the next slide. So when we're looking at the kind of overview of live, it's really important. A lot of the slides come down to kind of doing a bit of research, really, in terms of like what is out there. And I think one of the things that again kind of artists who are coming new to kind of looking at live opportunities is not necessarily understanding like who is involved in the gigs everywhere, and that's because it's kind of different everywhere. So some venues have in-house bookers, so there's someone like who just kind of works for the venue and they manage the bookings. They will book bands to play and they will maybe hire out a room. Sometimes there's a booker who is attached to a venue but actually works in other spaces as well. So they maybe like help hire that space out, but really they're booking gigs wherever they want. Some promoters, bookers kind of own venues, but maybe more than one venue. And but equally, and we'll put shows like wherever it makes sense and whatever kind of size venue it makes. And then most obviously, I guess, when you're starting to get bigger shows, like 1,000 plus, it tends to be national promoters. So people like Live Nation and SJM and things like that who are the people who, are tapped into the kind of bigger festival scene as well. So in everywhere, again, there's people from across Yorkshire on the call, based in different cities. Every city has like a different way in which it's made up, and every venue kind of works slightly differently. And obviously, we're most familiar with the way it is in Leeds. And just to give you a couple of ideas of the way it's split in Leeds is Super Friends, a promoter. They're based out of two venues, Hedgerow House and Belgrave Music Hall, but they do also book into other venues as well. You might be aware in Leeds there is a new venue right now called Project House, which is booked by both Super Friends and the team behind the Brunel Social Club. So if you want to play Hedgerow House and Belgrave Music Hall, you're going to end up talking to Super Friends. But also there's a remit where they kind of book into other spaces as well. So again, we talk about getting to know promoters. They do other things. Probably the biggest promoter in Leeds is a company called Future Sound, and they own two venues, the Wardrobe and Key Club. And something we'll come back to, with those two examples, if you're not aware, quite different in terms of the kind of booking policy. One's quite heavy rock punk, the other is kind of more indie with a leaning towards jazz and things like that. So even though it's one promoter, they're looking at different things. And I mentioned Future Sound are an interesting example because a lot of the kind of artists, when they book an artist for the first time, an emerging artist, they won't book them in those two venues. They'll book them in other venues that they don't own. In Leeds, you sort of 100 capacity venues, the Hyde Park Book Club and a Porto. And then both those two have their own bookers as well. So, for example, with Hyde Park Book Club, there are at least a couple of ways in which you could get booked to play there. You could get booked to play a Future Sound show. You could book with Hyde Park Book Club. But Hyde Park Book Club, and I'll talk about kind of putting your own shows on as well, like they have lots of other people putting on shows there. So they can come and book a show, like book a night there and then approach an artist as well. And so there's lots of different ways you can end up playing a venue, and understanding this role between venues and promoters and people really helps you. It plays a part of how you navigate all those things. There's a question here in terms of who does the booking for Future Sound. I mean, we could kind of be here all day in terms of like calling out specific people. Bigger companies like Future Sound and Super Friends, it's not one person. It's a team. And actually, the question there kind of really leans heavily into something I've got on a slide in a minute or two. So I'll kind of address like who to speak to in a minute. Yeah. Yeah, just another like aside on that. So that's the sort of very lead specific example, but some of you will know kind of other venues and like how they all interact with each other. Some promoters are not venue based at all. I've kind of messed up this slide a little bit, but the two examples I was looking here was Deershed and Long Division, who are putting on their own gigs. And they're obviously festivals, but they're putting on gigs in Wakefield, and Deershed put some around North Yorkshire. If you're looking again, I am rooted in kind of first steps and in Yorkshire, but you can look at what I just described in Leeds and think about how they work in other cities. So, you might think of an example in the cities you're based in, but if you want to branch out to Manchester, Liverpool, Nottingham, can you work out who all those people are Newcastle as well is another good example. They're all slightly different, and I think getting to know those things are really important. And if you're thinking, I mentioned a minute ago about kind of targeting places that you can go to. I think actually getting to know and like looking at what the venues are and who's booking them and talking to people, which again is something I'm going to mention in a second, is really important and kind of giving you the best chance. And as I said a minute ago, research what it is you're looking at. Here we go. So if you're looking at approaching venues and promoters, just like the question in the chat is like, who do you need to talk to? It's quite hard. Even you can get one-to-one recommendations, but the best way is to try and get to know them. So if you're based in a city, if you are based in Leeds, some of the people on the call now are, we've just talked about all that. Can you go if there is a night similar to the one that you would like to be playing and you feel like you'd work well on support? Can you go and talk to the people involved? Can you go when like doors are just opening or like half an hour before? The venue, the promoters aren't always around, but there will be people around who do know. Can you ask politely to talk to someone involved in the show? It's kind of obviously important. We're going to talk a bit later about kind of not getting in the way of shows while finding out, but hopefully everyone can be polite and do that. If there isn't someone directly involved, is the bar staff, door staff? Again, if you think of like walking into the smaller venues like Book Club and a Porto or wherever it is, Polar Bear, there will be people who will know like who's involved in those shows, and immediately kind of you have an in there. You might even know it. Again, I'm going to try not to reflect too much on my own experiences or regurgitate my own experiences, but I got to know a lot about what happened in Leeds when I was young, when the Cockpit was a venue, and I'd go and I'd hang out and I'd try to find out who were the people putting the bands on stage. And I think again you can do that. I think so. That's really easy to do where you are based, but equally, if you are really targeting another city, can you get up to those shows again? If there's an artist that maybe can you go up with them and find out a bit about the show? If there's a smaller artist at your level that you're fans with, can you kind of make a trip out of it and go and see that? Can you go into those venues, go and explore the record shops in another city, kind of get to know it? Because again, you can really kind of gain that insight that is way, way more effective than just cold calling emails and things like that as well. And again, like the other thing could be, it doesn't have to be venues, it could be artists. So if you know that there's a really cool band like that's just coming up that's just like you in Newcastle or in Nottingham or in Manchester, or if you're in Leeds and they're in Sheffield and you're in Hull and they're in York, can you go and see them and like work out what's going on, try and kind of replicate it and kind of like get in on a similar vibe, basically. So the other option is you're sort of talking about approaching, that's very much talking approaching the venues and promoters, but from a promoter's point of view. But especially if you're looking to, maximize the amount of ticket money you might make, can you actually put on your own show? There's lots of other advantages for that. Again, if you're building an audience, you can curate your own lineup. You're a bit more in charge of it. It might be that you have to take more on in terms of promotion. But again, some of the bigger promoters, when they are putting on hundreds of shows a year, it can often be a lot more personalized. And we'll talk about all the things you can do to promote. If you're doing lots of things, it can be that you put your own gig on. Now, obviously, there's can be costs involved in that. You have to pay. Generally, a small venue, you'll have to pay some kind of PA hire and pay the sound guys and things. That might be £100, but if you're going to say charge £5 in, that's only 20 people. Not many venues ask for that in advance at a small scale. So again, you might not think you've got £100, but if you can kind of make sure you've got enough people, enough friends you can bring along, then hopefully you can have confidence it can work. And that's before again you start working with other bands that you're friends with, or you might want to work with to kind of help in new fans. Again, if you've got two bands maybe from close cities and towns, you each know 20, 30 people might come and see you. You can bring that together. You've got a really, really strong show. And it can work a little bit better than being put on with sort of artists that somebody else dictates, really, depending on how it works and what it is you're trying to get out of them. So moving on a little bit in terms of like how to approach live performances and live opportunities. So when you're approaching promoter, for shows, be really clear about what it is you're asking for. Again, we get it a little bit through Launchpad when people are asking us like if we can put them on. You know, there is a whole swathe of artists out there who kind of want shows. And one of the things, obviously being having excellent music helps you stand out, but kind of being clear about what it is. Is there a specific time? Is it to do with a release date? Are you looking to pack tour dates in at a specific time? Is it ahead? If you're approaching, you know, bigger promoters or venues, you know, are you wanting to hire the venue out? Are you wanting them to put you on as a headliner? Is it that you're hoping to get on with kind of other similar bands? If so, what bands or artists? What kind of things are they actually booked? You know, can you? Is it a named thing? Is there you've seen 2 or 3 months time someone specific's playing? Um, Obviously, like the more specific it is, the more defined it is, the more, in some respects, likely it is that it might not happen. But in some, there's very much kind of don't ask, don't get. It could easily be that no one else is being that specific, and that might come off, and you might get a really cool opportunity to play with an artist just because you asked, you're good, you're available. I think one thing I'll come back to over a number of slides coming up is this. The next few coming up is this: Are you ready anytime? And I'm going to repeat myself a bit because I know this is on a slide coming up, but a lot of support slots with touring artists come up really late. It's something, and I'll explain in a minute when it comes up, that promoters kind of aren't really able to preempt. So if an artist knows, if a promoter knows you and knows that you're easy to work with and are organised, it can make it easier for them to ask you to perform those, to jump onto those bills. And that kind of ties through to the next few slides, really. Again, regardless of whether it's kind of a headline show you book 6 months in advance or kind of a last minute support slot, making sure all the band members are on the same page when you're talking and setting up dates is really important. Make sure you have a shared diary calendar so you know when you're available. Again, especially useful if you're getting last minute requests, so you kind of know what people's work patterns are and other responsibilities. It's really helpful if you have relevant documents already prepared so you don't have to scrabble around and doing them. Again, hopefully within doing the first couple of gigs that a band or an artist does, you'll get these things ready. Have you got all your promotional assets ready? So you get booked for a gig. Can you just send over your bio, promo photos, links to music already so the promoter can kind of help promote you? Do you have your tech spec and advanced docs? Not going to go into much detail about what those are here. Happy to kind of talk about them later. Generally, in terms of tech specs, is just knowing kind of what equipment that you need plugging into a PA, really, especially at an emerging level. I'm going to talk a little bit later about when things get into bigger levels, and if you ever have the opportunity to play academy, student union, or even arena level. But yeah, tech spec is really just knowing kind of what it is you're bringing and what needs to get mic'd and put into a PA so everyone can be aware of those things. And I'll mention about backline shortly as well. So moving on to fees, and we've just wanted to preempt something again that comes up quite a lot, and it is not right and it is not fair, but some of you will be aware that the kind of industry standard support fee for a sort of touring artist is £50 and has been £50 for about 20 to 30 years. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up is just to consider like where that's from. And I suppose there's often a lot of ire addressed at promoters for this, but often that is dictated to by agents and headliners. And when I say dictated to, I also mean kind of lazily dictated to because it is just the industry standard. And often these are agreed in terms of set costs, which I'll also come to in a second when I talk about kind of headline fees. Is the reason that it's set and it's outside of a promoter to mess with is it's based on the agreement that an agent and a headliner will have with a promoter in terms of what their fee will be. And really, there is a movement, and there are some artists who are much better at making sure that support bands have a fee. You will kind of notice that a lot of kind of more subsidised gigs have a much more generous fee for these things. But whatever kind of is above £50, there's still a sort of fight against that, in terms of being the standard, as the kind of anchor point for it all. And like I say, so I mention it so people are aware if they're not aware, and also that it's not always the people offering you that who have set that, I think is an important thing to recognise. If you're getting booked for a headline gig, obviously there's a lot more scope for you to kind of negotiate what that fee would be. The obvious options is whether it's a fixed fee based on the gig being sold out, or maybe just based on a certain fee. Certainly, that when the festival there's not really it's not really based on selling out if there's 100 acts booked. But for a headline one-off show, whether a ticket split comes is a thing. So then you might have what's called a guaranteed fee that is low-ish, but on the basis that you get additional percentages. Sort of an industry standard would be like 80% after all the costs have been met. And I think one of the things, if you end up doing a split agreement where you are getting a percentage after costs, is to agree what those costs are. Because if you are working with agents, like I've already mentioned, every cost will be noted at the point that the gig is agreed. So that includes £50 for support bands, that includes money for riders, any crew that you might need, or additional security. So if you are agreeing for percentages to be included after cost, it is being really, really clear about what those costs are. And again, you might want to consider whether the costs that are for the support bands is generous enough in itself for your gigs. So a couple of notices on other ways that a lot of kind of emerging artists will get kind of gigs with established promoters. The first one is kind of ticket deals. I don't quite know the best way to define this, but it's becoming quite common, especially for a few venues in Yorkshire, for support artists to get paid on pounds per ticket sold. So if an artist is playing a gig supporting a band, you will actually get paid per £1, £2, £3 for the amount of tickets that you sell. So before the gig, and number of people who turn up on the day and say that they're here to see you as opposed to support artists. In some respects, I'm not quite sure on how that works out and how we've moved towards that. They're not. I don't think that they're great deals for artists, but they're often the impression I get is when promoters are working with artists that they don't know. Like, they don't know if they're going to promote the shows. They don't know if they're going to add value to a show. It is a way of building that relationship. And certainly when that relationship goes well, we know that artists can kind of move beyond that kind of deal. I don't want to go into the ethics and politics of this too much, but I think one of the things, again, if you're an artist, to consider is the value of playing with on those kind of bills versus booking your own shows, because there is value in playing on those bills. That it's not necessary to make money. We looked at those criteria earlier in terms of what it is you're trying to get from live. So again, I think it's just considering what it is you're trying to do. The other thing that sometimes happens with tickets, and it is different to what I've just described, is pay to play, where if you want to play, you almost like buy your fee. You pay for a book of tickets, but then you keep all that money. But what it does is it unfairly places the financial risk on the artist. I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't know anywhere in Yorkshire that does that. I'm sure I'm leaving myself open for comments of places that do. I believe other parts of the country have had a number of promoters who've done that as standard. But the first thing described here, which is is a lot more common in Yorkshire, and as I say, while it's not a clear deal with artists, it doesn't it's not transparent, if that makes sense. Whereas pay to play very much puts all the financial risk on the support artists there. So do just be clear about what kind of agreements you're setting into before you agree to play those kind of gigs. Okay, I've covered this a little bit already because I've kind of covered it on being organised, but this idea in terms of advancing shows. So once you're booked, like what you need to get ready. So I've already covered the tech spec a little bit, being clear about what your technical requirements are are for that show. So again, my experience of putting on gigs 15 years ago, the nightmare was always that you'd book an artist had with loads of synths and they need multiple DI boxes, which you need to do synths in. And a smaller venue just wouldn't carry that many. And obviously, if you knew beforehand, you could kind of try and mitigate that. But again, it's just that kind of clarity in terms of what is being expected. You might get to the point where you have the opportunity to ask for a rider. So again, you may or may not drink alcohol. You may have allergies. You may not drink certain kinds of alcohol. So you might not drink beer, for example, for various reasons. So again, if you've got the opportunity to put in something that is modest and reasonable, it is again just having that lined up. Otherwise, you could just end up with 8 cans of warm Carlsberg, which no one really wants. So there is that opportunity there, and obviously, if you're lucky enough to kind of become successful and work on bigger shows, it is worth thinking about what is really helpful in terms of rider requirements. Are you traveling to shows and you don't have any? You might need some food. Again, it's a quite extreme example. I was looking enough to tour where we were traveling overnight on buses, so actually cereal was a really useful thing to ask for. Cereal and smoothies and innocent smoothies was quite useful. So yeah, so if you kind of start growing, you can think about what is generally useful. It isn't just a case of asking for as much alcohol as possible, although some people will want to do that. I'm just going to jump over the backline question and go to that food, accommodation, travel expectations, and buyout. Is again, so doing on that again. If you travel, it would be really nice. And if you were traveling, touring around Europe, there would be an expectation that you would get fed, and accommodation may well be provided as well. Unfortunately, that is far from being standard in the UK. So don't have any expectations around those things. And again, if you are in a fortunate position where you're able to negotiate for things, do make sure you are asking for things that are useful. I'm not sure if we'll have any kind of DJs, electronic musicians kind of on the call, but certainly in that world, things like accommodation and even travel are much more standard. But if you're kind of lugging a band and playing kind of the traditional kind of grassroots music circuit, these things are unfortunately not very standard. Food sometimes is, especially if you're kind of working in kind of like community venues, there will often be food. So again, that rider requirements might be useful if you have any dietary requirements or allergies for sure. One piece of terminology I thought would be useful to mention again as you go is this thing called a buyout. So again, if you're at a level where you will get some, you will be provided with a meal. Sometimes the venues won't be able to provide that. They won't have the facilities to provide food. So a buyout is basically just cash to buy food. And that's what that means. Jumping around a bit again. So going back to organising shared backline, this can be last minute, be prepared. Again, one of the most stressful things we even find as Launchpad is organising backline, because there is a real sweet spot. So by backline, we mean, drum shells, guitar amps, bass amps, speakers, things like that, not the front of house PA. And it's tricky because it is a sweet spot, because you obviously need to make sure you've got what everyone needs, but you don't really want to duplicate things. So for example, if you are running a live music bill where there's 4 bands, you don't want everyone to bring their own drum kit, because the change over the technical stuff would be too extreme. So again, hopefully the promoter will take some lead in that. But if not, you really need to get stuck in, because what you don't want to do is turn up with a drum kit when there's another 2 or 3 drum kits already there. Equally, you don't want to assume that there is a guitar amp or a keyboard that you can use when there isn't. And those are the things that often cause kind of bad blood and resentment and things. So that sounds a bit extreme, doesn't it? But can create kind of bad vibes sometimes when it comes to performances. For anyone who's played any of our Launchpad gigs, we're always you're always quite stressful, but we're always quite on it as something that hopefully we try and smooth over. So do be aware. And again, unfortunately, it is something that's quite last minute. And an attachment to that in terms of scaling up an expectation of bigger gigs and festivals. Again, by the time you start performing at big festivals, arenas, and things like that, you are probably going to have a team of people around you who will help look after you. But there is always a chance that you get an opportunity to play bigger. Is one of the things once you start playing really big gigs is there isn't the equivalent of an in-house sound engineer. So we're probably all used to turning up at a venue, 200 capacity venue, and obviously there's a sound engineer there for you. Just one thing to warn you: if you start playing bigger tours, you will find that, and you're walking into, say, an arena, that the sound guy who is with the PA is just paid to set up the PA and isn't paid to do your sound, as an example. And the same would go for the lighting rig and the monitor rig. And again, from my experience, the first time we did that, we were suddenly about £300 down because we had to pay all these people to do it. So again, if you, and this links a little bit into contract terms. So again, if you get the opportunity to play bigger gigs, do make sure you understand what is being provided for you and what the expectation on you is to supply, really, and literally in terms of sound engineer. And again, if that feels a little bit intimidating, again, just be aware to reach out to someone, really. If you do get those bigger opportunities, have that spark in your mind that actually, yeah, there's a few, it doesn't work quite the same as playing the local venue. Just need to try and check or get someone to help in terms of what it is. My thought would be that if a bigger artist is helping you out and booking you for an opportunity like that, there's a duty of care to help to communicate that with you. But like that isn't always the case. So that all sounds quite scary. It's a great opportunity, but again, it's the same with a lot of things in music. It's just talking about them and trying to be clear about what it is that is going through. So moving on to promoting your shows. And I think the kind of variety of social media and websites and everything has actually made promoting shows a lot more difficult than it ever was before. And again, kind of some real kind of points just to try and hit when you're playing shows is the first thing, harking back to the talk in week one around, promoting your releases, is make sure it's on your Songkick or your bands in town or both, and that they are connected to websites, Spotify, socials. Make sure people know you're playing gigs. And that is a real blind spot with people at the minute. If you're not aware, Songkick is a sort of is the industry standard tool. You can use the coding and put it into websites. It plugs into all kinds of different things. It connects with venues and other artists. And really, the reason Songkick is so important is it connects to your Spotify account. Also, I think it links to your Bandcamp account as well, which is another thing that I'll come back to. So really just make sure that your gigs are listed and you have somewhere where all your gigs are listed, ideally, at least Songkick. So if you're still active on Facebook, and Facebook, if you are active on Facebook, it's still a really good place to promote stuff. Think about creating a Facebook event. It does sometimes feel a bit pointless. Again, from our perspective, doing Launchpad events, it's certainly something we're not as hot as we used to be in terms of doing that. But, hey, if you're trying to get as much people to come to an event, it's not a bad idea. Physical promotion is still, I think, as effective, or if not more effective, than anything else. So again, if it's your own show, can you you need to make posters. You need to tell people. Again, something we try and do with Launchpad, we try and get posters for our events into venues. How can you make them stand out? Can you make them cool? Have you got a friend who's an artist? Is there a way? Are you an artist? Most people in music are obviously pretty creative. Can you do something? Can you push it? Can you flyer similar shows? If there is a band that is again at a smaller level, maybe, but even a bigger level who you think sound like you, can you go to the same venue and flyer those shows as well? If you've created a lineup and there's new artists and you're really excited about it, can you make a playlist of them performing? Maybe it's new artists and they're not on Spotify, but can you is there something else worth just putting some stuff on Songkick? Can you use that as a kind of audio flyer for getting people to the shows as well? What can you do to encourage people that coming to your gig will be a cool night out? And mailing list and social media as well. If you've got a mailing list, hopefully, you're going to remember to tell them and give them regular updates about the gigs. But wherever you're telling them about the gig, and this goes for all the social media stuff as well, how are you going to help them remember about the gig? And that's something where you might want to consider tickets, doing, advanced tickets for the gig. Now, again, especially if it's, you might be working with a promoter and they've done tickets. So you've got tickets already. And if you've got tickets, you might consider putting them on your own Bandcamp as well, as an example. But if you're doing like your own show, for example, sorry, I keep saying for example, um, it's really just like I used to like just doing shows where it was, like a five on the door or £3 on the door. I think probably what we were doing them, just keeping it like super, super simple. But actually, if you're doing a lot of promo online now and you're trying to kind of commit them to coming, is it worth going, well, instead of just remembering this show in like a month's time, go and buy a ticket and then you've kind of already invested in it already. So there's a few advantages in terms of that. You also perhaps gives you promotion within like local record stops. And I would say, especially outside of big cities, if you've got a cool record shop in your town, wherever you are, there's just one shop that also sells tickets. Can you make that a hub? If they don't sell tickets, could you persuade them to? That could be quite a cool thing. If you're doing it online through things like Bandcamp and Eventbrite, you have the added benefit of collecting like mailing list info, like Jazz was talking about a couple of weeks ago. So you can start building your mailing list. You literally know who's coming to your shows that way. You can also bundle it stuff as well. So again, if it's a release show, could you bundle a ticket in the new release? Is there any other cool and inventive things you could do around that? And then the final slide, I probably should have put this sort of more clearly on another slide. Is again, is it worth, especially if, I suppose it's on this page because it's especially if you are trying to drive people to ticket sales, is it worth paying for digital ads and boosted posts? And we know a lot of people have had really good experience. Again, if you're specifically driving them towards a ticket link, you can kind of see that interaction. And the one word of warning I'd have with that is just be very specific with the geographic targeting of that. Again, a lot of ads, if you've not looked into them, they're super sophisticated in terms of like who you target, ages and demographics. If you're trying to sell tickets for a gig in Hull and you've got your social media following includes people in London and Scotland, make sure you're not wasting money hitting them. Just focus it on people, within a 10, 20, 30 miles of the place that you are playing because, you can do that. So once you're already doing the show, what we've talked about your motivations for playing the show, building audiences, making money, like making connections. But how can you make the most of it when the fans are there? So really similar follow on to before. How can you keep a connection with the fans that are there? I'm actually going to skip and talk about merch. So again, whether you're trying to make enough money or not, merch is obviously a great way to build connections. But again, it's worth thinking about. Don't just sort of scrabble around and have like a darkened thing at the back of the room. Think about how you display things. Do you need to take a light? Obviously, depending on what you're selling, you can expand this. Is you need a light? Are you selling t-shirts? Is it helpful to have a coat hanger so people can actually see them? Can you make it clear what's available? Make a sign. Don't just scribble it on marker pen. When you get there, make sure you're charging a good fee. How are you going to take money off them? Nowadays it's important to have a card reader. If you're doing this properly, they're pretty easy to get now. You can get one through PayPal, through iZettle, through Square. I think that we got one for Launchpad stuff, and I think it cost us £20 to set up. So again, think about what you can do. And again, it's about making money, but really it's about, your brand being there. And we haven't really got time and scope to cover within this, but thinking about what your merch is, and how desirable that is for people doing it. And all those things feed into like you keeping a connection with the people who've come to see you. And that idea that, again, I'm thinking, I said it right at the start, there's loads of generalization here, but the generalization that, in this respect, that you are reaching new fans. So how are they going to find out about you after the gig? And, it's totally reasonable that you, for the vibe of your band or your artist persona, you don't want to just be reeling off social handles. Follow me on this on stage. Some people that comes really natural to. Some people it feels like it jars with what they want to do on stage. So if it does jar, like what are you going to do? What else are you going to do? How are you going to make people aware of like how they can find you, how you can follow them, and how you can push in? Again, doing what I said I wouldn't do and reflecting on my own experiences, we would go out into the crowd with literal clipboards and mailing lists after a show and get people to sign up. And of course, if they want to find out more about you, they will give you the email address. There's probably more sophisticated ways to do that now. But, essentially, if you are in the fortunate position that you've played a gig to people who've never seen you before and they really want to know more about you, how are you going to make that connection. And thinking about that before a show is really important. Okay, so kind of coming towards the end of today, really, and just talking about through of the kind of more industry centric side of the live experience and kind of the other sort of stakeholder and people that you'll be working with. So talking about kind of booking support slots, because again, a lot of the artists we speak to, that is one of the main things that people are really kind of hopeful to get and see as a really good way to expand their audiences, which it totally is. So in terms of getting support slots, again, I'm kind of trying to be fair to all the promoters in the world, is that if you're trying to get a support slot with a touring artist, the promoter is often at the bottom of the chain in terms of who gets to decide if there is a support and who it is. So you're probably aware that a lot of touring artists will have a touring support, at least one. And at that point, there will be a little bit of openness as to whether like a second support can get added. That can take like a really long time to get organised. And a promoter will be the last to hear. So it can be the reason a lot of these slots come up really late is that it is quite late in the day. An agent gets around to telling a promoter that actually there isn't anyone coming, so they can book who they want as a local support. What that means is there's two things that means. Is one is that is why promoters find out quite late. But the other point to emphasise here is that it's the agents, as discussed with the artists and management, who hold all the cards there. So again, if there's something you're particularly interested in, if you're building networks and relationships across the industry, it's getting to know who the agent and management are of specific artists, as well as the promoters themselves. So you can often have a sort of multi-pronged approach in terms of trying to get support slots with specific artists, which goes to the next point in terms of doing the research in terms of who teams are and who else is supporting. Again, if you're lucky enough to get a support slot with an artist, it's very important to understand that it's about that headline artist, and they can have loads of stuff going on that to you doesn't maybe feel important, or you don't see. It could be their sixth gig in 6 days. They could have driven 300 miles to get there that day. They could be on their last day before they go home. They could have been in a day before where they didn't get to do any washing. They could have had stuff broken. It's about being respectful in terms of where they're at, and just being important to say hello and be polite and respectful. And the flip of that is you can make great friendships through those things. Again, personal experiences. One of my bands got to play a lot of local sport shows in Leeds and made really great friends who we then went on tour with across the UK over the next couple of years, because we got on really, really well and we were helpful and things like that. So it's a really good opportunity to meet people, but it's really important to kind of be respectful around other people who are touring as well. So the other thing, of course, which a lot of people are really is a really good way to kind of build your fan base and grow, is to play festivals. Of course, festivals come in all shapes and sizes now. They come from kind of more regional festivals that maybe kind of 5,000-6,000 people, right up to your Leeds festivals and Glastonbury's that are like 100,000. So the first thing to understand is that they work in very, very different ways, and the people that you're talking to in all those different festivals work in lots of different ways. So again, just like the kind of doing your research, it's really important to try and understand who the people are who are booking them and what other events they promote. So it might be that it might be that if it's a regional festival, that they do other regional shows. Again, a good example we talked about already is Future Sound. They put on the regional shows. They all support on live at Leeds Festival. So you probably get to, with any festival booker, you will need to have some kind of track record for them to kind of see you on that lineup, or a relationship. So again, this goes back to one of the priorities in terms of like, if you are wanting to play a festival 9-12 months ahead, how do you get to know that booker and build a relationship with them over that time, really? And that goes for almost anything. I would say the bigger festivals is almost impossible to get booked without a booking agent, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But those local festivals are often rooted in what those promoters are doing the rest of the year. So get to know that, get to understand that, and start a conversation with them mega early, if possible, about what they would want to see from you to then go and play those festivals. And something to consider is like, do you need to keep clear of other bookings? So again, I will use Live as an example, partly because we're just booking the Launchpad stage for that at the minute. It's really helpful for us. We can only really book artists who don't have other gigs around that. So if you were looking to play live at Leeds, you might want to consider not booking gigs around that day. And that would be the same for loads of other festivals that isn't just live at Leeds. And I suppose very specifically those kind of inner city festivals as well. So again, it's just having that foresight, thinking 6, 9, 12 months ahead, and where all these things fit into your strategy and what it is you're trying to build. Which kind of brings us on to booking agents, which is one of the last things to talk about. So obviously, having a booking agent, like many other members of a team, getting signed, getting a manager is a really, really important part of a team. One of the barriers to getting booking agents, I think, for us based in Yorkshire, is that unlike, say, managers and record labels, they are entirely pretty much based in London, or at least the ones that have access to kind of the bigger festivals. They are all based in London, or there is one agency based in Brighton. So it does feel like it's harder to kind of reach them. What I would say is that they, despite the fact that they're based in the south, they are obviously very networked. They regularly work with venues everywhere. They are booking artists into those venues, and they're booking with those artists. So again, if you are looking to kind of know artists who are on booking agents, having a conversation with them about kind of like what that means and how they come. It's really important if you're trying to get an agent to research not any agent is best for you. It has to align with your sound, your values, and the kind of fan base that you're trying to drive. So you want to look at like what artists they represent, what promoters they work with, what festivals they're booking onto, for a whole bunch of reasons. Like they might have fallen out with the promoter that you really like, or they might not actually have into the kind of world or the genre that you're working on. So it's really important to kind of think about that. So, thinking about what your favorite artists, who their agents with, and does it kind of fit with you. Having said they're all in the south, again, it's really, they are open, they are out at gigs all the time. So if you are playing down in London or Brighton, if you've got that relationship, try and invite them to a show. And of course, once you've got an agent, you can start building a relationship and building it up. One thing, again, fact to mention is that they do take between 10 and 20% of fees, and that is before costs. So again, kind of a real kind of, unfortunate part of the industry is, if you're paying £50 shows, but you're having to hire a van and stuff to go there every night, they're still taking their 10%. Obviously, the idea with the industry is that scales, so it's less dramatic. But unfortunately, at an emerging level, it can be quite tough because that percentage comes out before you've necessarily broken even. But they often are able to get kind of good gigs, maybe get you better fees for headline shows and things like that. So it obviously can work very, very well in terms of growing your profile and your audience. So final slide today as our office space, and there's a party starting downstairs. So I think kind of winding this down just well is the art of saying no. More is definitely not better when it comes to gigs, certainly not in the same location. And so really just harking back to those first few slides, it is worth thinking about what is the aim of each show, what it is you're trying to get from it. As I said, personal piece of advice, if you're trying to build in any location, including your hometown, is being strategic about it and trying to get to know who there is to approach. Again, like I already said with the example of festivals, actually, if you end up booking too many shows, it can be harder for someone to book you into something else. And actually, some of that's really, really hard. You can have a really sensible plan, and actually that support slot comes at a time where you had another show like a following week, and there's nothing you could have done about it. So but if you've thought about it, and it makes sense for you around all the other things that you're planning, releases and so on, you've done all that you can do, really, in terms of being strategic and in terms of it. And I think having said loads of stuff about being strategic and researching, and going back to one of the first things I said, which is playing for friends and family, is having fun. And if there is a point where you just want to throw a party and have fun, think about how that fit, what the impact of that might be, But if that makes sense and it's going to have an impact and it's going to excite your friends and the people who like your band, you as an artist, then you can just do that as well. Cool. And that's it for today in terms of live. Kind of hit an hour, pretty much bang on. I'm just going to do a little roundup. I'm going to stop recording in a minute. But if you have joined us for these 5 webinars, this is now the last one we're doing this year. We'll repeat them probably again next year when we've done another open call. Point is, we do with Launchpad is that we're always here to kind of try and support emerging artists and people building careers in the industry. We have our advice drop-ins, which anyone can book a slot in, which pretty much happen every other Tuesday, but we're also slotting them in more and more frequently in other places. If you're an artist looking to release music, we also have Launchpad Plus, which means and helps us work with a much wider range of artists as well. So really, however you're finding us, if you're watching this, if I'm talking to you live right now on Zoom, or you're watching this back on YouTube or something, come and find it. And there's some follow-on support that would be helpful. Do reach out to us and ask us how we could help. So thanks for watching today. I'm going to stop the recording and then open it up to questions from the live audience. Cheers.